I'm here with Bruce Irons. He's Specialty Soybean Manager for NK Brand Seeds in Canada. Bruce, glad you could make it today. Nice to have you here to talk to us a little bit about the IP market. So how's the IP market shaping up in Canada this year?
Hi Dave, good. Thanks for having me. In Canada this year, we are seeing a change in the IP market. If we consider Japan specifically, and that is our main market for Syngenta seed specialty soybeans, and obviously a huge part of exports from Canada. It's the clear hylam market for IP beans. What we're seeing there is the pipeline or the supply of white hylam conventional IP soybeans is still full. And this is a symptom of having bought too much in 2009, and I think also a symptom of the high yields that we saw in 2010. So the pipeline is oversupplied, and that is reflected in reduced premiums that we're seeing, reduced acreage being contracted by the various exporters that contract with farmers. And obviously it rubs off it affects our seed sales of clear hylam IP varieties.
So I was going to ask you about the NK beans. So what's happening with premiums on the NK beans for this year?
Well, because of the oversupply situation and the reduced demand, we are seeing premiums running about $1.75 to $1 a bushel less than they were in 2010, and less than what they were in 2009. So we have seen significant changes. Now, having spoken about the oversupply in Japan and the reduced demand for white hylam soybeans in Canada, there is a lot of interest in non-GMO dark hylam soybeans for the Southeast Asian market. That market is typically very price sensitive, and because of the oversupply situation, there is a surplus of cheap beans available to that market. So there have been a lot of beans shipped out to Southeast Asia at low premiums. But unfortunately, because our white hylam IP beans were bought or contracted at higher premiums, we haven't seen that oversupply being addressed by recent exports.
Interesting. So is $12 beans having any effect? I've looked at the markets lately, and the bean price is up there. Very good price for the growers. Is it affecting your IP market at all?
It certainly would. Growers would obviously look at premiums or the extra margin that they can make from soybeans, and look at that in terms of the proportion that premium makes up of the gross income. And certainly it's obviously a much lower proportion of that gross income at $12 or $13. So they then consider whether it's worth their while getting that extra margin, considering the extra work that is involved in producing IP beans. But there are other factors to consider here. We have developed a niche market, and when I say we, I'm talking about the Canadian soybean industry as a whole, and across all companies, all exporters and all growers. We have done a really good job of developing a market that is seen in a very favorable light by buyers in Europe, in Japan, in Southeast Asia. And we need to protect that. That is my thinking. If we consider the here and now, and if we take a short-term approach to this whole IP soybean market, I'm afraid that we might lose that reputation that we've developed.
Very interesting. I've heard a lot of talk about Genuity Roundup Ready to yield, Roundup Ready beans and planting that, whether it's the price or some softening of the market. So why, as a grower, would I continue to grow IP beans?
Well, granted, there's been a lot of hype in the press over the last couple of years about Roundup Ready 2 yield, soybean varieties, and yield comparisons that are quoted are in relation to Roundup Ready 1s. Now, obviously, it's much easier to manage a genetically modified soybean variety, a Roundup Ready variety. You don't have the dockage to be concerned about. Weed control is obviously a piece of cake. But there are other issues to consider. Apart from the niche market that we need to protect, we also need to consider the developing resistance of a number of weeds in the States and one here in Canada to glyphosate, and that is extremely important. We need to maintain a rotation of crops and thereby a rotation of different chemistries to avoid that happening. The other reason why one should be growing specialty soybeans, in my opinion, is that they do provide you with better margin given the same yields as Roundup Ready beans. It's interesting to note actually that if you consider the overall average yield of all conventional beans in the OOPS trials from 2010, those varieties collectively yielded on average 2 bushel more than Roundup Ready 1 and 2 beans together.
So the IP beans or conventional beans, we're still seeing a higher yield coming out. There's still breeding going in it, so the yield's still there, and plus the benefit of a premium.
Absolutely. They are by no means lagging behind in yield. And you bring up another point that I really think is important for us to reinforce, and that is Syngenta Seed's long-term commitment to the conventional soybean program. In Canada here, our plant breeding budget for soybeans, for conventional beans, is approximately 45% of our total soybean breeding program, and that is significant. We have 4 new conventional varieties that are going to be released in 2011, and another 4 in 2012, and there are in fact another 35 varieties that we're assessing for release in 2013. Obviously not all those are going to be released, but that gives you an indication of the size and depth of our conventional soybean program. It's an incredibly important component of our business here in Canada, and we have to thank farmers and dealers for the support that we've seen for our varieties.
So you spend a lot of time, talking to exporters and attending meetings. From what you've heard this fall or this winter, and what you've picked up through all your talking to the people that you've interviewed over the past, what's the future of the IP soybean market for Ontario? What do you see happening in 2012 per se, as far as premium goes, as far as demand? There's talk, of course, of Roundup Ready beans that are white highland coming into the market. What do you think is going to happen in this market as we go forward?
Well, if we look at it short term, and by short term I mean 2012, exporters generally feel that we will be returning to a normal situation by then. We're seeing a lot of consolidation of food manufacturing companies in Japan. 26 years ago, exporters tell me there were 17,000 tofu manufacturers, for example. There are now only 11,000. So we're seeing these companies there are fewer of them, they're becoming larger, they're becoming easier to deal with, and hopefully the fact that they're becoming larger and their economies of scale are growing, that may well rub off on our business, our IP soybean business, and make it more reliable. Long term, I think we need to consider the fact that Canada is held in extremely high regard. We have an amazing reputation for producing quality soybeans, Typically, our protein levels are 2% higher than they are in the US. We're only second to Brazil in the world for protein levels. We have the infrastructure here in Canada. And above all, we've earned the confidence of our buyers in the East, a very fussy marketplace. We've earned their confidence, and I think that bodes well for our future. Whether IP soybeans are in the form of conventional beans or Roundup Ready White Highland beans, it doesn't really matter. I think long term, we have a bright future, and we need to build on that solid foundation to develop that market further. Our share of exports to Japan are increasing versus the US, and that is mainly because we've developed this market here.
Well, thank you very much, Bruce. It's been a great information session. Again, Bruce Irons, Specialty Soybean Manager with NK Seeds, spending a little bit of time with us today just to talk about the IP soybeans and their future within Canada.
Thank you very much. Enjoyed that discussion.